The Subcommittee on Railroads, Pipelines, and Hazardous Materials will come to order. I ask unanimous consent that the chairman be authorized to declare a recess at any time during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. And as a reminder, if members wish to insert a document into the record, please also email it to documentsti@mail.house.gov. I now recognize myself for the purposes of an opening statement for 5 minutes. Today's hearing, we will discuss the state of commuter passenger rail with a focus on developing commuter rail to ensure it is safe, efficient, cost-effective, and that it meets the demands of the public. Investments and innovation in our rail infrastructure are essential to building a robust and competitive American transportation system. We must ensure that federal policies and spending are balanced with a realistic analysis of consumer demand for commuter rail and the best use of taxpayer dollars. Technology has now made it possible to work remotely. Many workers have responded by purchasing homes farther from the cities and foregoing their daily work commute. This naturally affects commuter rail ridership and demand. Commuter rail service is primarily designed to address a high volume of passengers traveling to and from cities, operating in metropolitan, suburban, and ex-urban areas. These systems can be a cost-effective transportation alternative for these longer commutes. Several local and regional agencies operate their own service, while others contract with Amtrak or private sector companies. These private sector providers help lower costs, improve services, and increase ridership. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses about the challenges and opportunities for commuter rail services, as well as best practices to improve service, realize efficiencies, and increase fare revenues. Before I recognize Ms. Fushi, I'd like to take a moment to say we wish Ranking Member Payne a quick recovery. I look forward to seeing him return to work with us here in the subcommittee soon. And with that, Representative Fushi, you are recognized for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair Nels, for holding this hearing today. The Research Triangle expects to add more than 1 million people by 2050, and we need to provide good mobility options. I am hopeful that commuter rail can be a part of that solution. On the passenger rail front, I do have 2 state-supported Amtrak routes in my district, the Carolinian and the Piedmont, which carried more than 600,000 people last year. The Piedmont saw a 36% increase in ridership after North Carolina and Amtrak added a 4th daily round trip. In early December 2023, the U.S. Department of Transportation announced a $1 billion grant to develop a new intercity passenger rail route between Raleigh, North Carolina, and Richmond, Virginia, along the CSX line that will connect North Carolina with Virginia, Washington, D.C., and other destinations along the Northeast Corridor. I am proud to see this historic investment, which will bolster transportation options in North Carolina for North Carolina's residents. I championed this investment long before arriving to Congress and appreciate the work my predecessor, former Transportation Appropriations Subcommittee Chair David Price, did to develop this intercity passenger rail route. This generational investment, made possible by the bipartisan infrastructure law, will make historic changes in my district. I look forward to working with you, Mr. Chair, and with our committee to ensure that this type of investment continues in the future. Let me now turn to rail safety. I am hopeful that this committee will focus on this important matter because we have not yet heard a hearing on the Norfolk Southern derailment that happened in East Palestine, Ohio, or the 1,000 or so other derailments that occurred across the country last year. Last month, Secretary Buttigieg sent a letter to the Class I Freight Railroad Association that expressed concern with the freight railroad's resistance to improving safety. He highlighted that the Federal Railroad Administration statistics do not show safety improving significantly over the past decade. He encouraged the railroads to join with Congress and regulators to improve safety rather than continue to fight against proposed safety reforms. I ask consent to put Secretary Buttigieg's letter into the record.
Without objection.
There are several legislative proposals that have been introduced in the House that could serve as the basis for us to address rail safety. Furthermore, the National Transportation Safety Board, or NTSB, has 190 outstanding rail safety recommendations from prior accidents and incidents. The chair told us this in January and reiterated it again last week during her renomination hearing. I hope when the NTSB's final East Palestine report comes out in June that we will be able to quickly turn to this issue. At the same time, the safety regulator is expressing concern. The economic regulator is also raising red flags. Surface Transportation Board Chair Martin Oberman stated at a February conference for rail shippers that the freight rail workforce has declined dramatically over the past decade. While some railroads have refocused efforts on making capital investments and rehiring people to make improvements, others continue to cut workers and cut their capital expenditures. I ask consent to put STB Chair Oberman's speech into the record.
Without objection.
Freight rail is essential to our nation's economy, but over the last 10 years, freight rail movements declined. If we want to see the environmental and safety benefits of moving freight by rail, it seems nearly impossible to do so if the railroads do not have enough people or are not making enough investments in their infrastructure. Turning back to commuter rail, we have been discussing in my district introducing commuter rail to Durham since the early 1990s, but we don't yet have it. I look forward to learning more about commuter rail services around the country from our witnesses, and Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields. I now recognize the ranking member of the full committee, Mr. Larson, for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vice Ranking Member Fushi, for holding today's hearing on commuter rail. The BIL supercharged our nation's investment in passenger rail, providing $102 billion in planned funding for intercity rail and $108 billion for transit agencies. A significant portion of this can be used for commuter rail. Now, the BIL guaranteed multi-year funding for the state of good repair investments and corridor development for intercity and commuter passenger rail. It made possible, for the first time ever, dedicated, reliable federal funding dispersed over 5 years to improve and expand intercity passenger rail. The transit agencies, Amtrak, the FRA, and the FTA are implementing long-term plans for passenger rail expansion and improvement, secure in the knowledge that the funding is there for the next 5 years. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today about the difference this budget certainty has made for developing and sustaining infrastructure improvements, and then, of course, what Congress can do to keep the momentum. Commuter rail systems have benefited from BIL funds, including the Capital Investment Grant, or CIG funding, which supports transit expansion. In my district, Sound Transit runs Sounder trains with 2 round trips every weekday between Everett, Mukilteo, Edmonds, and Seattle. Further south, the Sounder serves commuters between Tacoma and Seattle. The trains run on freight tracks owned by BNSF, and BNSF operates the trains. Amtrak provides maintenance, and Sound Transit owns the stations and provides security. This partnership is an example of the layers of support and coordination often necessary to provide commuter train service in the U.S. And even at the federal level, there are silos, though, with Federal Railroad Administration providing most of the regulatory oversight of commuter rail and Federal Transit Administration providing the bulk of the funding. So I look forward to hearing recommendations from the witnesses for the next infrastructure bill to make passenger rail funding and service more effective. Now, BIL passenger rail funding is creating jobs, it's growing regional economies, it's reducing congestion and carbon emissions, it's building a cleaner, a greener, safer, and more accessible transportation network. For example, the FTA announced over $631 million to replace 302 aging transit rail cars, including over $100 million for Metra in Chicago. That's just the beginning. This transformational investment in the BIL is a great start. I'm committed to ensuring reliable funding for long in the future. The BIL is also an investment in workers. Federal rail funding will develop a well-trained, diverse workforce to build, operate, and maintain intercity and commuter rail systems. So while commuter rail agencies have access to dedicated funding through transit programs, there's no similar guaranteed source of funding for intercity passenger rail. And without the BIL's advanced appropriations, intercity passenger rail is dependent on the annual appropriations process to fund its longer-term major capital projects. Since commuter rail often shares tracks with freight or intercity passenger rail, investments in commuter rail benefits those other partners. And the FRA's Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvement Grants, or CRISI, can be used to upgrade commuter rail property that is shared with Amtrak or freight rail, and the BIL guaranteed $5 billion in advanced appropriations for CRISI. And providing steady funding for intercity passenger rail will allow states and communities the certainty they need to plan and deliver more and better passenger rail service. So I thank the witnesses for being here today, for sharing your perspectives on these and other issues, and help us hear about the opportunities and challenges facing you all in today's environment. With that, I yield back.
The ranking member of the full committee yields. Again, thank you all for being here. Look forward to hearing from each and every one of you. Before I would like to take a moment to explain our lighting system for all of you. There are 3 lights in front of you. Green means go, obviously yellow. Slow it down a little bit, you're running out of time. And then red means stop talking. I ask unanimous consent that the witnesses' full statements be included into the record without objection so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided answers to any questions that may be submitted to them in writing. Without objection so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by members or witnesses to be included in the record of today's hearing. Without objection so ordered. As your written testimony has been made part of this record, the subcommittee asks that you limit your oral remarks to those 5 minutes. And now I'd like to briefly recognize Mr. Yakum to introduce our first witness, Mr. Noland. Mr. Yakum.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my pleasure to introduce Mike Noland, the president of the Northern Indiana Commuter Rail Transportation District, which back home in Indiana we call the South Shore Line. The South Shore provides a vital connection between South Bend, Indiana, and in my district, and Chicago, and many points in between, including the Indiana Dunes National Park. I and many other Hoosiers have fond memories of taking the South Shore to Chicago. I'm sure many people from Chicago have fond memories of coming to South Bend to catch maybe a Notre Dame football game. Mike has over 3 decades in the rail industry, and he's presided over major capital projects for the South Shore Line. I especially want to highlight the almost complete $650 million double-track project, which will further cut down the time from South Bend to Chicago by making the full route double-tracked so that eastbound trains don't have to wait for westbound trains and vice versa. Mike and I go way back, and I'm thankful that you invited him today to lend his deep experience and expertise to our conversation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
With that wonderful introduction, I would like to now recognize you, Mr. Noland, for 5 minutes.
On behalf of the members of the Commuter Rail Commission, Coalition, thank you, Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Larson, Congressman Fushi, for inviting us here today to testify on some very unique issues, challenges, and opportunities facing commuter rail across the country. I would like to also thank Congressman Yakum for his vigorous support of the South Shore Line, and of course, our wonderful Governor, Eric Holcomb, who has been an incredible cheerleader and champion for commuter rail in the state of Indiana, investing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into our rail system. As mentioned, my name is Mike Noland. Today, I'm here as chairman of the Commuter Rail Coalition, an industry coalition representing the public agencies that provide 98% of all ridership in the country, plus over 30 private sector consultants and suppliers that support our industry. I'm also president of the Northern Indiana Commuter Transportation District that operates the South Shore Line. And as Congressman Yakum mentioned, we're a 90-mile system that runs from South Bend, Indiana to Chicago, Illinois. I'll focus my testimony today on 2 specific areas. First is the lack of capacity in the excess liability insurance market, and second is the Amtrak statutory authority over public sector commuter rail operations. Commuter railroads purchase annually $323 million in excess liability insurance. That's the federal cap. The cap will be adjusted in 2026, and it is based upon the Consumer Price Index. That's the sole determinant of the cap raise. We expect that the cap will go up from $323 million to over $400 million when the CPI is used. To be clear, commuter railroads are not required to purchase up to the cap. We do so because we have to comply with our third-party contracts. If a commuter railroad is unable to place that coverage, contractors, software providers, host railroads like Class 1s can put us in breach of contract, and the likelihood is that some of us will have to suspend operations. The Commuter Rail Coalition is asking for Congress to give us a technical correction to the 30-day implementation rule that is currently in law when the cap is raised. We would like 365 days of time to place the additional coverage. Why 365 days? Well, if all of us, all 32 railroads in the country at the same time approach the excess insurance markets, we think it's very unlikely that we'll be successful. We have to go after these markets with a time when there's shrinking capacity in these markets, and if we're all there with 30 days to try to place that coverage, we don't think that's a recipe for success. We know that we must search for alternatives to our reliance on foreign insurance markets. We ask Congress to work with us to explore options and do studies. We also are looking for help from Congress, perhaps to support some loans so that we could establish a national commuter rail industry liability pool. We are looking for ways to exercise self-help to resolve this issue. My final point has to do with Amtrak's relationship with commuter agencies and the need for the Surface Transportation Board to serve as the arbiter of any disputes between commuter railroads and Amtrak. The Rail Passenger Service Act of 1970 provided railroads the opportunity to be relieved of costly passenger operations, and Amtrak took those over. In return, the railroads granted priority to access to Amtrak over their routes and only charge Amtrak incremental costs. Importantly, public commuter rail agencies were not part of that grand bargain. However, Amtrak's statutory powers under the RPSA apply to our systems. Now, the CRC is a strong supporter of improved and expanded passenger rail networks in this country. We are not in any way anti-Amtrak. However, we believe that commuter railroads should not be subject to Amtrak's statutory powers under the RPSA of priority access on our lines or from only charging incremental costs if they're using our service. We would ask Congress to establish a well-defined process to issue resolution between commuter railroads and Amtrak. We believe the STB is the right body to adjudicate such disputes, and we hope that Congress, in the reauthorization, will provide the STB that power. Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Larson, Congressman Fushi, thank you on behalf of the Commuter Rail Coalition for having this hearing today. We appreciate the opportunity to realize the full potential commuter rail has to be stewards of the public interest, and since I have the opportunity, I invite any and all of you to come out on May 13th to our ribbon-cutting ceremony that will be held in Gary at our Miller Station. If you can't make it for that, come out anytime. We'll give you a ride on the South Shore Line, which is the nation's last remaining interurban passenger railroad. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Noland. Ms. Johnson, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Larson, Congresswoman Fushi, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to join my industry colleagues to discuss opportunities and challenges facing commuter rail operators nationwide. The face of commuter rail is evolving. This vital public service is now experiencing a renaissance. Agencies across the country are delivering service that match needs of a hybrid workforce, as well as to provide more attractive mobility options to discretionary customers. To advance these enhancements, investments are a must. On March 29th, the Federal Railroad Administration released the Notice of Funding Opportunities for fiscal year 23 and 24, $2.4 billion for rail safety and infrastructure improvements. Amtrak and short-line railroads are eligible to apply, but not commuter rail agencies. The CRISI program, administered by FRA, funds projects that improve the safety, efficiency, and reliability of intercity passenger and freight rail, yet commuter rail priorities are not eligible for direct funding under the CRISI program. Since CRISI was first initiated, Amtrak has seen its access to direct funding grow exponentially, while commuter railroads must compete with all other surface modes for discretionary funding. There is no existing specific U.S. DOT program that is focused on commuter rail infrastructure and rolling stock. Commuter rail agencies seeking federal assistance to maintain a safe, efficient, and reliable network have been shortchanged. Speaking to rail safety, most commuter rail capital needs are related to safety investments that ensure commuter rail remains one of the safest mobility options. When agencies invested over $4 billion to implement positive train control systems nationwide, this investment came at the expense of locally prioritized improvements and/or service. Capital reinvestment projects were postponed or delayed indefinitely, while operational safety was maintained at a significant but necessary cost. As the subcommittee considers future rail safety legislation, the commuter rail industry welcomes the policies and practices that may emerge in that legislation. That said, reliable federal funding for continued commuter rail safety investments is paramount for long-term sustainability. Hazardous materials are frequently transported by freight railroads across alignments shared by commuter rail. The cost associated with these inherent risks must be borne by the freight railroads as a cost of doing business. Thus, they must be held accountable for their safety practices. The Commuter Rail Coalition supports the concepts advanced in the Senate's proposed Railway Safety Act legislation introduced by Senators Brown and Vance last year. That said, the coalition's primary concern with the legislation is the significant costs that commuter rail agencies are being asked to absorb for the benefit of private entities, specifically with the wayside technology requirements such as hot boxes. It cannot be overstated that such requirements are for the freight railroad's sole benefit. Considering that commuter railroads operate under a much stricter safety regime than freight railroads, commuter rail operators foresee little, if any, benefit from the hot box detector introduction on our rights of way. While the Senate bill proposes the installation cost to commuter railroads be partially offset by a new reimbursable federal funding program, coalition members have significant concerns with this requirement. First, taxpayers should not shoulder private entity costs of safely moving freight. Second, the reimbursement program envisioned in the Senate bill would neither fully cover the hot box detector installation costs nor the required ongoing maintenance. And third, many commuter railroads currently have unfunded capital projects that are a matter of public necessity. Diverting public funds for a private sector purpose is not good government. Congress has an opportunity to address these concerns and several others in any final legislation. On behalf of the Commuter Rail Coalition, we look forward to further collaboration. Mr. Chairman, Congresswoman Fouché, and Ranking Member Larson, it's been a pleasure to appear before the subcommittee today to share concerns as an industry and, most importantly, to express our support for achieving even greater safety levels in the commuter rail industry. Once again, I offer our collective expertise and assistance as you move forward on safety legislation and ultimately the reauthorization of the Surface Transportation Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Mr. Desch, you are now recognized for 5 minutes. Turn on your little button. Well, pull the mic closer. It should turn on red. Do you see a little red? Maintenance, get on there.
Try this again? Okay, thank you very
My
much.
apologies.
No.
All right.
I'm sure it was my fault. Thank you, Chairman Nels, Congresswoman Fouché, for the opportunity to testify today before this subcommittee. My name is David Deck, and I am the Executive Director of the South Florida Regional Transportation Authority, and we provide commuter rail service on behalf of the Florida Department of Transportation, known as Tri-Rail. I'm here today to talk about two main topics: the benefits that the commuter rail industry has derived from utilizing outside private contracted services, and some additional views on overall rail safety. But first, I'd like to add that the additional funding that we have received through the federal formula funds and the new rail car replacement program, both a result of the bipartisan infrastructure law, have provided critical assistance that will allow us to address important capital replacement needs. Also, we all recognize that COVID-19 has fundamentally changed the way we live and work, including altering commuting patterns. I am very pleased to report that Tri-Rail ridership has steadily grown over the last few years, and as of the last couple of weeks, we are exceeding pre-pandemic ridership numbers. Regarding contracted services, the South Florida Transportation Authority, as well as my previous employer, Capital Metro in Austin, Texas, rely heavily on private outside contractors to provide our services. I've worked with both bundled and unbundled or bifurcated contracts, wherein you contract with either a single contractor for all of your needs, or you split those contracts up among different companies. Either of these strategies can be beneficial depending on the needs of the commuter rail agency. SFRTA has relied on outside contracting since its inception in 1989. These contracts are competitively procured. Outside contracting is particularly advantageous when standing up a relatively new railroad, allowing the agency to leverage the expertise of the private sector to roll out the service and maintain it while it matures. While most of the focus is on large operating and maintenance contracts, there are other opportunities for specialized competition as well. Examples would be PTC maintenance, security, fare collection, all the way to leasing of rolling stock. We believe that we benefit from competition. There are 7 private contractors who offer a full range of services: Herzog Transit Services, Keolis, Alternate Concepts Incorporated, Amtrak, Bombardier Alstom, RATP Dev, and Transdev. This subcommittee will in the near future may consider legislation to further improve executive who has served in both the freight and passenger worlds. I would like to offer a few observations. But first, let me emphasize that the Commuter Rail Coalition supports the concepts advanced in the Senate's proposed Railway Safety Act legislation. Where we differ is who should bear the costs and whether there are other technologies that may be useful. Commuter railroads are taxpayer and fare box funded, and we believe that the installation and operating expenses for wayside defect detectors or other equivalent technology should be borne by the entities benefiting from such technology, and in this case, that would be the freight carriers. Mr. Chairman, please allow me to be clear on this point. The commuter rail industry fully supports the introduction of any technology or change in practice that will lead to improved rail safety. We need to ensure that these changes do not degrade the quality of our service, and we do have concerns of the potential impact of a increased number of hotbox detectors on our service levels. We also fully embrace the funding of the research and development of new technologies that may meet or exceed the abilities of existing wayside defect detectors. Chairman Nels and Congresswoman Fushi, I again want to express my thanks for the honor and the opportunity to be part of this process and share my experience with contract services and the Commuter Rail Safety Act. And I'll be here to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to get it right. It's Deck, correct?
I've been called much worse. Yes, Deck. That's correct. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Deck. I now recognize Mr. Corbett for 5 minutes, sir.
Yes, good morning, Chair Nels, Ranking Member Larson, and Congresswoman Fushi. Thank you for inviting me here to discuss the bill and its impact not only on the Northeast Corridor, which serves up to 800,000 rail passengers every day, but on commuter railroads across the nation. Speaking today both as co-chair of the Northeast Corridor Commission, which I serve alongside my fellow co-chair, FRA Administrator Amit Bose, in addition to my role as president and CEO of NJ Transit, the largest statewide transit system in the country and the 3rd largest overall. I'm also co-founder of the Commuter Rail Coalition, an association of 25 commuter rail agencies acting together to engage and educate stakeholders on the value commuter railroads bring to the communities they serve. As some of you may remember, I testified before this committee in both 2021 and 2020, where I largely covered NJ Transit's experience implementing positive train control. We at NJ Transit remain extremely proud of the Herculean effort to successfully achieve PTC certification by December 2020 deadline, although to be clear, significant challenges with PT still persist. For example, there are currently more than 5 variations of PTC systems nationwide, which can create significant interoperability challenges. And of course, there are significant and ongoing costs associated and with upgrades and maintenance of PTC going forward. NJ Transit alone has spent more than $500 million on this unfunded mandate, and this figure will only continue to grow. We continue to advocate for creation of a more cost-effective, unified, standardized national system across railroads throughout the country, call it PTC 2.0. While the implementation of PTC represents a significant step forward in our commitment to safety and operational efficiency, it also highlights the broader context of the challenges we face in rail transportation, stemming from historical underinvestment and the inherent complexities of balancing the needs of commuter and intercity rail service. For decades prior to the public takeover of rail transit, our country disinvested in railroad infrastructure, which left Amtrak and the commuter railroads with a huge hill to climb, a burden we still carry on today. Further exacerbating capital funding challenges, many agencies continue to face operating budget challenges as well. When there's a hole in the operating budget, many transit agencies are forced to use capital budget dollars to fill the gap, an insidious practice that ultimately undermines long-term infrastructure resilience and growth. Whether our railroad network is in the hands of private or public sector operators, there is no magic wand. We cannot improve efficiency, reliability, and safety for our customers without adequate funding for both operating and capital. As such, I'm a strong advocate for commuter rail systems to have access to the Consolidated Rail Infrastructure and Safety Improvements, CRISI program, just as intercity rail does now, or a similar source of such funding. While the markets we serve may be different, both intercity and commuter rail systems have significant operating and capital needs. To be certain, NJ Transit supports Amtrak, and we have a good working relationship with them, although there is always a natural conflict, a tension that exists between intercity and commuter rail, which should not be an insurmountable barrier, but rather a challenge to be managed with strategic collaboration and open dialogue. Speaking more broadly about funding, the bill has been transformational for both commuters and intercity rail. Thanks to the work of Congress and the Biden administration on the bill, the NEC has its first ever source of dedicated multi-year funding, providing the predictability needed to more efficiently deliver a major capital program. This historic investment weans us off what I call the transit hunger games, where agencies routinely compete against each other for constrained funding that's never enough to maintain even a state of good repair, much less the ability to modernize or expand. In addition to the increase in formula funding for commuter railroads through the bill, the FRA and FTA are awarding billions of additional dollars through various discretionary competitive grants. These grants are vitally important as we and other transit agencies pursue sweeping projects that are beyond the scope of our traditional capital budgets. Projects such as AI-powered safety system, with light rail vehicles that we are currently being funded by the FTA, for example, where we have being able to invest in safe modernization and state of good repair to ensure that our constituents get safely and service improves out of every dollar that we spend. Perfect example of what transit agencies can do when given necessary federal resources is New Jersey Transit's $2 billion Portal Bridge replacement project, which is on time, on budget, and 50% complete in just 2 years, with the first track scheduled to open in 2026. Portal North Bridge, as many of you know, is a critical single point of failure on the Northeast corridor between New Jersey and New York, which is also a critical link between DC and Boston. Switching hats for a moment to my role as co-chair of the NEC, it is important to note that the bill provides significant down payment on Connect NEC 2037 or C37, a 15-year plan covering 300 projects, along with a comprehensive renewal program for state of good repair work, including track, signal, and power systems. With a substantial funding from bill, we now have an opportunity to utilize the FRA's Northeast Corridor project inventory effectively. This inventory is crucial as it allows us to strategically prioritize projects along the NEC, ensuring that the investments are made where they're needed most to enhance safety, efficiency, and reliability along the whole corridor. As we approach reauthorization, it is vital to recognize that NJ Transit, like commuter rail agencies nationwide, continues to operate with substantial unfunded capital needs. For example, we are incredibly grateful for the passage of bill. This funding will not be sufficient to bridge the nearly $5 billion gap between funded and unfunded projects in our unconstrained $17 billion capital plan. Reauthorization presents a critical opportunity to secure the necessary funding to bridge this gap. For this funding to be effective, it must be guaranteed like the funding provided in bill. The guaranteed advance appropriation that bill provided was a game changer for the Northeast Corridor and allowed agencies to more effectively plan their hiring, purchase equipment, and sign contracts. It's also essential to streamline funding mechanism to reduce the complexity and increase the efficiency of how federal funds are allocated. This also boosts confidence among manufacturers and contractors and other stakeholders crucial to our projects. Infrastructure has historically been a bipartisan issue in this country, and I am hopeful that this spirit of cooperation will continue through the reauthorization process, enabling us to tackle our significant capital needs head-on.
Thank you, Mr.
In the interest
Corbett.
of time, I'll close.
Thank you. You're a great, we'll have time to ask questions, but thank you so very much for your attention. I'd like to briefly recognize Ms. Napolitano, who will introduce our final witness, Mr. Kettle.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm proud to welcome Mr. Darren Kettle, CEO of Metrolink, to our committee. Good to see you again, sir. Metrolink is a major transportation provider for the residents and businesses in my district throughout Southern California. He was appointed in 2021 as Metrolink CEO. He has more than 30 years of experience, effective transportation leadership in Southern California, having worked for 3 of the 5 Metrolink member agencies, including my neighboring San Bernardino County Transportation Authority, Riverside County Transportation Commission, and most recently, he was Executive Director of the Ventura County Transportation Commission. He has overseen implementation of positive train control and gone beyond to ensure safety and the next generation of feeder locomotives. Mr. Kettle, thank you for being here, and thank you to all the witnesses for attending, and we look very much forward to your testimonies. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Kettle, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you for having me here. Good morning, Ranking Member Fauci. Again, my name is Darren Kettle. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Metrolink, Southern California's 6-county commuter rail system. As was mentioned during my introduction, I was previously in Ventura County. I still live in Ventura County, 60 miles from where my office is in downtown Los Angeles. I am not only the CEO of Metrolink, I am also a customer of Metrolink. I regularly take the train. Metrolink was formed 3 decades ago by Southern California's transportation agencies and operates on a dedicated right-of-way as well as with active freight lines. Today, Metrolink has about 20,000 weekday boardings on 142 daily trains operating on a network of 545 route miles. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, 3/4 of our riders held monthly passes. With today's remote and hybrid work schedules, commuters ride less frequently, and so commuter railroads must change our business model to attract new riders. 2 Metrolink initiatives have proven quite successful in boosting ridership. The first initiative involved increasing off-peak, evening, and weekend service frequencies. We call it Metrolink Reimagined. It's been introduced on one of our lines that serves Los Angeles County from Los Angeles to the Antelope Valley, or the high desert of Los Angeles County. The second initiative offers free fares to every student in Southern California with a .edu web address. College students and high school students are able to take our trains for free. Now, nothing is free. It is state grant funded, so we're able to take care of our program and keep our fare box. These 2 initiatives boosted our overall ridership by 27% on that one Metrolink line in just 4 months. And due to this success, we're looking forward to implementing this new schedule throughout our system. 2 historic developments hold promise to permanently transform rail passenger service in Southern California. First, the Olympic and Paralympic Games, which will be hosted by Los Angeles in 2028. Expected to attract 3 million spectators, the games are designated as car-free, meaning that parking will not be available at the venues for those sporting events. Southern California's transit system must be prepared for the unprecedented demand, and Metrolink will provide the regional backbone transit service to those games from the 5 urban counties of Southern California. We have shared with the administration our multi-year funding needs, which include the operational surge in 2028 and rolling stock, maintenance facilities, and rail improvements throughout our system. While the federal government provided crucial transportation funding for prior U.S. Games, a significant funding need still exists for the LA Games, and the window of opportunity to complete rail projects and procurements is rapidly closing. We need congressional and administrative support to realize the promise of this transformative moment for public transit in Southern California and our nation. The second development is high-speed rail between Las Vegas and Southern California. The first 200-mile-per-hour train in this country, it is Brightline West. Brightline West is planning a groundbreaking ceremony next week to start construction on that high-speed rail line. Metrolink presently operates a station on the exact same footprint of where the Brightline last station stop will be in Rancho Cucamonga in San Bernardino County. We have coordinated with Brightline West to ensure that our schedules match up with theirs to ensure a seamless connection for travelers on both systems. By attracting those currently traveling by air or by highway, high-speed rail can significantly boost passenger rail use throughout Southern California. My colleague Dave Deck of Tri-Rail addressed the importance of private sector partners in efficiently delivering commuter rail service. Metrolink also operates on a contracting business model, enabling us to efficiently ramp up our future operations and maintenance, temporarily for LA 28 in those Olympic Games, but also the longer-term connections for high-speed rail. Finally, I would also like to echo the testimony of Deborah Johnson of the Denver Regional Transportation District, urging that commuter rail be granted full eligibility for the CRISI grant program, currently restricted to projects that benefit intercity and freight rail. Distinctions in federal statute between intercity and commuter rail appear increasingly outmoded, and we join the Commuter Rail Coalition in urging reform to the CRISI program. Chairman Nels, Ranking Member Fushi, and subcommittee members, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to working with you and your staff in delivering the vision of transforming passenger rail service in Southern California. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kettle. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a letter from the American Short Line and Regional Rail Association dated April 17, 2024. Without objection, so ordered. Thank you all for being here in your testimony. We will now turn to questions from the panel, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. First question, Mr. Noland. Amtrak asserts that it has a right of track preference over the commuter lines. How does Amtrak's use of commuter lines impact commuter rail services?
Well, if we have built, which we just did, a $650 million project to really build up our own commuter system. We've got schedules that are based upon the infrastructure we've built. We also have a freight partner that uses that line. If Amtrak shifts their current service onto our line, that will use up capacity. And so we need to have the ability to have a fair arm's length negotiation if Amtrak's going to come to our line and not simply, and they have not said this, but they have the power to say, thank you for negotiating, but we have the right to enter your line. And if we do come on your line, all we have to pay you is the incremental cost to be there. For us, that seems to be an inequitable circumstance, and we would suggest that that needs to be balanced with fair and reasonable adjudication if we can't reach an agreement.
Sure. Mr. Corbett, you have any thoughts?
Yes, I think for us, we have a good relationship with Amtrak, but that Amtrak preference does have if there's a train coming hours late on Amtrak, that's for us. We're operating 20-plus trains on the Northeast Corridor, particularly at rush hour. So we have to wait till that train comes through. That can hold up, 1,000 people on each one of our trains. So I think the key for us is to be part of the dispatching. We can live with Amtrak preference if we are part of the dispatching, which currently we're not.
Sure. And Mr. Nolan, at a recent subcommittee hearing, NTSB Chair Jennifer Homendy expressed the need to eliminate the red tape and better communicate with communities to improve grade crossing safety. How might FRA improve communication and streamline the application process and grant distribution with regards to the rail crossing elimination program?
Well, I think everybody on this panel would agree that wherever we can eliminate a grade crossing, that's a good result. We talked about positive train control. It's a great system. We invested $4 billion plus into it. Saves lives. It makes us a safer system. But if we collectively look at the injuries and deaths at grade crossings across the country, it pales into comparison to what PTC is doing for us. So we are big advocates, and anything that we can do to make access to those funds simpler and easier, we support that.
I agree with that, and that's where the lives are lost, the injuries are taking place. I think there's about $500 million, if I'm correct, in that program. I believe that there should be more robust funding into that area, without question. Ms. Johnson, RTD Denver has applied for federal loans and grants for rail improvement projects in the past. What has been RTD Denver's experience in these application processes?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our experience has been one that has been slightly cumbersome in the sense of trying to understand fully the rules of engagement. We have leveraged opportunities by partnering with other jurisdictions when we have taken advantage of the opportunities to rehabilitate our Denver Union Station nearly 12 years ago. And so as we go forward, basically understanding more in a straightforward manner would be advantageous for us to take advantage of programs more holistically.
This one here, I guess, again, for Mr. Nolan, but anybody can, you touch upon it in your opening statement. We talk about this, the issues commuter rail faces with regard to the excess liability insurance and that 30-day window to obtain the insurance. You're asking for that 1 year, that 365. You want to just add a little bit more, and then maybe we have a second or two for some of the others. So if you want to, Mr. Nolan, if you want to touch upon it one more time, or?
Sure. The excess liability insurance market is all foreign. So we're not buying here in the United States. This is not Buy America. We're going to London and we're going to Bermuda. The prices have skyrocketed and the market capacity is shrinking. And I think anybody who's followed the news has seen that in homeowners or car situations, insurance is getting more costly and less available. And we're seeing that in the excess insurance market. There's approximately $400 million of rail excess market available worldwide. And when the Act is adjusted, when the amount in the cap goes up, we are going to have difficulty placing that coverage.
Mr. Kelly, you have any comments on that or any point?
I would just echo what Mr. Nolan said. When the increase occurs in 2026, that's where we get real anxious. For now, we're stable. 2026 is an entirely different question.
Yeah. It has my attention, and hopefully the members of this subcommittee, we're going to continue to look in that because you should be able to buy that insurance here someplace in the United States. All right. I will now recognize Ms. Fushi for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you again to the witnesses for your testimonies today. This question is for any or all of you. Do your contract partners work with rail unions?
Work with rail unions?
So I can address that. Yes, our outside contractor in South Florida, we do deal with we are organized labor both on the transportation, dispatching, and on the maintenance of equipment side, as well as maintenance of way. So yes, ma'am.
Ms. Fushi, Deborah Johnson once again. We are part of a concessionaire agreement, and in reference to the employees that they have, their signalmen are unionized, but the conductors and engineers are not.
On the South Shore Line, we directly provide service. We have 300-plus employees who are with 5 different national rail unions. We are right now in negotiations, so we're no different really than a Class 1 or other commuter properties that have directly provide service. So yes, we have union employees.
That's for us, we have 12,000 employees, 10,000 of which are unionized. Overall, our rail is fully unionized directly for us. Our light rail is contracted out, but they are also fully unionized.
And just lastly, again, Darren Kettle, CEO of Metrolink. Our engineers and conductors are Amtrak contractors, and in that fashion, they're represented.
Thank you. The next question is for Mr. Corbett. Should other regions of the country have similar regional commissions to the Northeast Corridor Commission? And if so, what would be the benefits of that?
Thank you. I think we have seen it be very beneficial. It's been a growth curve, a learning curve since the commission was created. But we really see that now, particularly with the funding, we're able to prioritize and cooperate and work collaboratively with Amtrak. Sometimes there's tension. When it was all the Pennsylvania Railroad, intercity and commuter rail, even within one company, that's a natural tension, but we worked that out. And I think the success and the progress we've made at the Northeast Corridor Commission would be a good role model for some other regions as well, yes.
Mr. Deck, Do you think the flexibility in the Senate version of the Railway Safety Act that allows railroads to submit a plan to the Federal Railroad Administration for alternate technology options for hot box detectors gets to your concern on what alternative technologies there might be to hot box detectors?
I think that's a good start. You know, it's there are technologies out that are available that, like, our agency isn't big enough to kind of leverage those, put that R&D in. But I know some of the Class 1s have been dabbling for quite some time, and I know there's some grant money out there for research and development, because there are ways we can leverage different technology, even existing technology, such as using the fiber optic lines that are along the railroads. With advances in machine learning, you have the possibility to map the acoustic footprint of what is a healthy bearing. So over time, with enough research, you should be able to map that out and then be able to pick out an overheating or malfunctioning bearing, which will be far more effective than waiting every 10, 15, 20 miles.
In a March 2023 press release, the Association of American Railroads stated that they would immediately install 1,000 additional hot box detectors every 15 miles. What are your thoughts on why they would say that if the technology is obsolete?
The technology's there. It is a surefire way to add a layer of protection. I think that that's a small market. I'm a supporter of wayside defect detectors. I installed them in Austin when we didn't have any. We have upgraded our defect detectors here. I worry about the supply chain and being able to fulfill those orders, which I think will affect the cost for all of us, which is, I think, why we need to look at some alternatives.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields. I now recognize Mr. Keene for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. I would especially like to thank Mr. Kevin Corbett, President and CEO of New Jersey Transit, for traveling south to inform us of the challenges faced by New Jersey Transit and also the critical work they do for the great state of New Jersey. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing, as it's critical for my constituents in the 7th District of New Jersey, which relies heavily on commuter rail on a daily basis. May that be for commuting eastward into New York City in the morning, or commuting westward in the afternoon, or reverse on those routes in the morning and the evening. The ability to catch a children's sporting event or other activities, or to or to access dinner with their families and on a timely basis. Having an efficient rail system is vital for that to happen. It needs to be predictable commutes, and it needs to be as easy as humanly possible. New Jersey Transit is operating efficiently is vital for all New Jerseyans. As Mr. Corbett knows, my constituents are enthusiastic about the Hunter flyover, that it basically constructs a flyover south of Newark Penn Station to eliminate at-grade crossings and to reduce conflict between trains, increases capacity for New Jersey Transit and for Amtrak alike, enabling New Jersey Transit to improve Raritan Valley Line service. That is why I introduced, and this committee and the whole House has passed, the One-Seat Ride Act, which directs the Secretary of Transportation to conduct a cost-benefit analysis of a one-seat ride trip versus a transfer trip option during peak hours on New Jersey Transit's Raritan Valley Line. This committee and this House should recognize the immense benefits commuter rail has for the state of New Jersey and the Northeast Corridor, but also the potential for future benefits to the entire nation. Mr. Corbett, as I know, you're extensively familiar with the Gateway Project and its benefits, not only to New Jersey, but to the entire region and to the country. Additionally, I know we have spoken many times regarding the need for a one-seat ride option on the Raritan Valley Line before the completion of the overall Gateway Project. As you know, I worked with one of your predecessors over a decade ago to secure the first ever off-peak option for Raritan Valley Line commuters. A key part of having a full-time redundant system throughout New Jersey and throughout the region is making that the Hunter flyover is a reality. In September of last year, it was announced that FHWA awarded an additional $425 million in federal transportation dollars to NJDOT as part of the federal August redistribution process. I know that funding is key for completion of the Hunter flyover. Is New Jersey DOT allocating any of these funds for this project? And what is the current status of the Hunter flyover completion?
Thank you, Congressman, and thank you for all your efforts on behalf of New Jersey Transit and for our regional and national economy in that context. Hunter flyover, as you know, a one-seat ride and a smooth transition. The flex funds that we get from FHWA does not have that flexibility to cover Hunter flyover because that's just a pure rail bridge. We did put in for a raise grant for it, a competitive raise grant, but that we did not that did not make the cut for a raise. And I think that's one of the reasons we're looking at Chrissy, because this would be a kind of bridge that would be perfect for Chrissy. It will improve both Amtrak. Instead of going for a ladder across, cutting across the Northeast Corridor, it will bring the Raritan Valley Line over and tie in right into the corridor smoothly, so not disrupting Amtrak or our Northeast Corridor trains, but be able to tie right in, so it is a critical piece of infrastructure. But that's the challenge. We're in the preliminary design work for that, but to get the funding to really go to full design and contracting, we need to, we do not have that funding. So that's a critical issue, and that's one of the things we would like to see. Why Chrissy
and the ones, as you know, the one-seat ride on the Raritan Valley Line can be completed long before the Gateway project is complete. It's vital to my constituents and needs to be prioritized. As you mentioned in your testimony, there's always a natural conflict that exists between New Jersey Transit and Amtrak. But what are these conflicts? You said they were managed with strategic collaboration. Specifically, what are the most common areas of conflict between New Jersey Transit and Amtrak operations, and how are they usually resolved?
Well, I think for the purpose of regarding the bill, I think the money that we spend on projects like Elizabeth Station, if they are projects that are beneficial to us but not necessarily a priority for Amtrak, the workforce availability has been the biggest cause of delays and cost overruns when they're not able to provide protection. And I think one of the things we've done through the Northeast Corridor, as this money's coming in, to allow these projects to move ahead quicker, is for projects where Amtrak cannot supply their workforce in a timely manner, is for us, we're doing a pilot program right now for County Yard Delco LEAD project, where we will do the flagging because it's for our benefit, and our flaggers will be properly trained, but so that we can do that, which will free up Amtrak's labor force to be able to work where they do have their limited resources as they ramp up. They're adding a lot, but right now they can't, they struggle to provide adequate flagging up and down the corridor.
Perfect. Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize a very valued member of this subcommittee, Mr. Moulton, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. It's an honor to be here with all of you. Mr. Chairman, you talked about how more people are working remotely. We heard that from a number of our witnesses. My estimation is that this will delay some of the ridership goals that were laid out before the pandemic, but not ultimately reduce them. And I was going to brag about how, as of February, Boston commuter rail ridership had reached 96% of pre-pandemic levels, but Mr. Deck has already surpassed pre-pandemic ridership. So congratulations, and I won't pat ourselves on the back for that. But the bottom line is that commuter rail systems need to modernize. In Massachusetts, we're talking about converting from a commuter rail system to simply taking people in and out of the city to a regional rail system that will fundamentally get people around the Commonwealth faster. That's when they're valuable, if they can get you around faster. Now, when we have highway hearings, we often talk about EVs and self-driving vehicles, but most of the clips from this hearing could be from 1949 because we're fundamentally talking about technology that is 75 years out of date. Ranking Member Larson talked about the contributions of the bipartisan infrastructure law to intercity rail services like Sound Transit, which, like my MBTA commuter rail in Boston, operate with essentially 1950s technology at 1900s speeds. By the way, not 1920 speeds, because by 1920, most speeds were faster. And if you compare commuter rail timetables from 1920 to today, they're mostly faster in 1920. That's pathetic. Vice Chair Fushi talked about intercity passenger rail in North Carolina, a great investment, but the reality is that ridership estimates for this new system are very low compared to highway or air traffic numbers for one clear reason: they're too slow. I'm grateful for Mr. Yakum, actually, because he was, I think, the only member to discuss actually increasing speeds, which Mr. Nolan is accomplishing on his system. And Mr. Kettle, thank you very much for talking about the importance of high-speed rail, even though there was no dedicated high-speed rail funding in the bipartisan infrastructure law. So one question I have for all of you is, what are you doing to actually increase speeds, to attract riders because you can get people faster where they need to go? There's a 1947 rule that limits speeds to 79 miles per hour without automatic train stop based on a crash in 1946. Where are we with PTC? We have PTC. How many of you are petitioning to increase speeds on your lines now that you have adopted PTC? I'm going to take that for the record because we have limited time, but I would very much appreciate your responses. We also talked a bit about the Senate bill for more hotbox detectors. Hotbox detectors are 1960s technology. And sure, we can put more of them. We could put one every 5 feet, and it would reduce but never eliminate crashes. Whereas if you had onboard technology to actually measure the bearing temperatures in real time, just like we have onboard technology that we wear, wearable technology all around, you could actually eliminate accidents. That should be the focus of our committee, modernizing. And so the big question is, okay, so why are we so behind? Why is this? Well, there are a number of reasons, but there's none bigger than funding. And Mr. Corbett, you talked about historical underinvestment, decades of subsidizing highways and driving in airports and airlines. But while we celebrate $100 million for Metro commuter cars in Chicago, you couldn't build a single highway interchange for that kind of money. We're talking about PTC here at the same time as we're talking about next generation air traffic control. There's one big difference. Congress pays for it, for the air system, but is forcing private railways to pay for the rail system. Now, we also talk here about increasing fare revenues, but we never talk about doing that with driving, to actually make people who drive pay the cost. So I asked for a study in Massachusetts to examine the cost of driving. Conclusion, $64 billion annually to the Commonwealth, just in the small state of Massachusetts. That's $14,000 per person that they are paying with their tax dollars to subsidize people who drive, even if you don't own a car. Even if you don't own a car, that's what we're paying to subsidize driving. And instead, the MBTA system in Massachusetts is estimated to save about $15 billion a year because of increased, that's just in terms of the highway that we don't have to build and the 3,000 acres of parking spaces we don't require. It also has $11.4 billion in annual economic benefits. If you look at Massachusetts in terms of airports, it's the same thing. Terminal E just got a $700 million expansion. If you look at the number of passengers it will serve, that's about $130 per passenger investment. At the same time, we're repairing the Orange Line with an investment of $3.13 per passenger. So the bottom line is that I'm a big fan of America, but I'm not a big fan of our commuter rail systems. We need to modernize. We need to catch up with the rest of the world and what this commuter rail systems to move forward. I hope we can accomplish that with you. And Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Mr. Moulton, I appreciate your insight. I now recognize Mr. Yakum for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Nolan, we've talked both about the transformational impact that the $650 million double-track project will have on the South Shore and our local economy. From an initial concept to next month's groundbreaking, how long has it taken for the double-track project to come to fruition from concept all the way through to completion?
Well, Samuel Insull thought about it 100 years ago, but 10 years ago, our board passed a strategic plan. We started the engineering in 2016. So from the time we went out with preliminary engineering and environmental to finishing up the punch list, which is what we're doing today, is 8 years.
And there's been a lot of work over the course of the last 8 years. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Can you briefly walk through how the financing of this project came together?
Well, we have financing from a lot of different sources. 4 counties that we operate in each contributed $18.25 million towards the funding. In 2 of the counties, it was split between the county government and the city of South Bend and St. Joe County, as you know, and $12 million from Michigan City and the other $6 million from LaPorte County. We also received funding from the state of Indiana, tremendous funding from the state. I mentioned Governor Holcomb is our major champion there. Appreciate that. And then we went out and received funding from the capital investment grant process. We have a a full funding grant agreement with the FTA for the balance of our funding.
So many sources of funding over the course of the last 8 years to come up with the $650 million.
Correct.
So you and the South Shore Rail Line put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears over the last, call it now, 10 years almost, to put together the funding, the contractors, and everything else to make this double track a reality, which we're going to open next month. Yet, as I understand it, Amtrak, which doesn't currently operate on South Shore's track, is considering essentially inviting itself onto the double track. Is that correct?
Amtrak currently runs parallel to us on the Norfolk Southern. They have historically indicated they have issues with their on-time performance and capacity. And I think they see the opportunity to use the significantly improved right-of-way. And so we've had conversations with them, and they've indicated they'd like to strongly consider moving their operations over to our line.
And if they do that, you would have very little bargaining power over Amtrak's compensation to you. And it would be essentially Amtrak that tells you what it believes is going to be a fair rate for them to come onto your tracks. Is that correct under current federal law?
Absent across-the-table negotiations at arm's length, Amtrak does have the statutory power to come on our service and only pay incremental cost.
Did Amtrak contribute any money or other non-monetary support for the double track project?
No, sir.
Mr. Chairman, I hope that we can watch this space very, very closely. And I will say I've had a very good dialogue with the CEO of Amtrak, Stephen Gardner, in this hearing room, but also in private, in my office. And I want to make sure that if Amtrak does go this route, it does so only after it follows through on its promise and commitment of close consultation and adequate compensation for the South Shore Rail Line and the double track project. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, again for holding this hearing today, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Ms. Napolitano for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The question for Mr. Kettle. With 500-plus route miles serving more than 20 million people, how does Metrolink prioritize investments in infrastructure or programs that increase access to a service for underserved communities?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So, as you said, we service a large market, Southern California, 20 million people. Many of the lines that we operate on originally were freight railroad lines, and they go through a number of disadvantaged communities throughout Southern California, including your district, but all over Southern California, where we have residents of lower incomes. We've established a couple different programs. One that we're quite proud of is a program that allows for any individual with an EBT card to get 50% discounts on the ability to ride our trains regardless of age. We also have programs for active military and seniors. And of course, I mentioned during my opening remarks our Students Ride Free program that has been tremendously successful across the region. As I've said, I ride the train, I see the students, I see what it's doing to change their lives, and it's growing our ridership, so it's a win-win.
Thank you. You mentioned a concerted effort to replace older, more polluting locomotives with the cleaner models. Why does Metrolink need to add cleaner burning diesel locomotives to its fleet? How many do you have now? What impact will these newer locomotives have on Southern California? How many is the agency seeking to purchase?
Our current fleet is a fleet of 55 locomotives. 40 of those are virtually brand new Tier 4 locomotives, the cleanest burning diesel locomotives in the country. I don't think anybody will question that Southern California has historically had a real challenge when it comes to air quality. So it would be irresponsible for us if we didn't make best efforts to make sure that our entire fleet is, that entire fleet of 55 is the cleanest burning diesel engines you can find. Our goal is to get to 53 of our 55 to be Tier 4 locomotives. Again, the oldest ones we have are only introduced into our fleet in 2017, so they're brand new. And then we are going to be testing the market of zero-emission push-pull locomotives. We received a regional grant most recently in the amount of $60 million for us to start looking at exploring zero-emission push-pull locomotives. It would be the first demonstration of that type of technology in the country. And I should mention real quickly, we will also be launching our hydrogen fuel cell multiple unit in the region in our, with some of the, where we have some of the dirtiest air in San Bernardino County between San Bernardino and Redlands. It'll be the first zero-emission multiple unit, hydrogen-fueled, in-revenue service in the United States.
Thank you. California, as in other states, has severe housing shortage. How does Metrolink service help connect people living in more affordable areas of the region get to their employment centers?
Again, we live in a vast region. Some of our trips are 70 or 80 miles because that's where the affordable housing is, whether you work in Orange County or Los Angeles County. And our trains get there. We have started working with home builders to provide incentive programs. As new homeowners are purchasing homes in outlying areas that are more affordable, we're working with home builders to develop programs that get people onto our trains so they know that the commuter rail system in Southern California can be an option for them besides driving a car.
Great. Would you explain a little bit of what you've done with the positive train control to better the service?
Positive train control, along with all of my colleagues, it's been something that we have pursued. We were the first to actually have it in the country in Southern California. What we've learned with PTC, though, is that it's all about safety, but we are finding value added in PTC. Most recently, we have been able to connect positive train control to shake alert. Everybody knows Southern California has an occasional earthquake. So now we are set up to the point where shake alert through PTC alerts our engineers, depending on the severity of the earthquake. It may entirely shut down that train if it's within a certain radius of where the earthquake occurs, or it may simply tell an engineer that an earthquake has occurred, you need to slow your train or stop it. So we're taking the opportunity of this safety technology and taking it to a whole nother level.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Stauber for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know we are discussing commuter rail today. However, I want to discuss crime. And crime is happening on all modes of public transportation, buses, transit rail, commuter rail, you name it. It wasn't always this way, but Minnesota has changed with our current governor at the helm. It is now known for leniency for criminal behavior. There's no better proof than the Metro Transit in Minneapolis. Let's start with a quote, party car. On the 3-car light rail, operators never enter the middle car when the light rail switches directions. This was quickly noticed by a certain crowd. The middle car now attracts riders who are more likely to smoke or break rules, so much that it is conversationally known as the party car, that middle car. So instead of cracking down on the bad behavior, however, the Democrats in Minnesota, they took a different approach. Fare violations are now a petty misdemeanor, a $35 ticket instead of a $180 misdemeanor charge, and they've replaced police officers with Transit Rider Investment Program, TRIP agents, non-police agents who are to remind criminals of their behavior. Now, it has become so bad that they are considering reducing the size of the trains, rolling out a 2-car train instead. Instead of punishing the criminals, our state would rather punish our good citizens who are just trying to get to or from work. To our witnesses, I know Minneapolis is not alone in the fight against crime, but it is clear our state leaders are lost on this issue. What have your commuter transportation systems done to ensure the safety of your passengers? Mr. Kettle.
Thank you, Congressman. As I mentioned in my earlier remarks, I'm a user of our system. I ride the train, I'm a customer. I see what our customers see on a daily basis. What we've addressed on our system, and generally speaking across the country, commuter rails are considered relatively safe as in the transit sector. But that's not enough. We have Los Angeles County Sheriff deputies that ride our trains regularly. My Chief of Safety, Security, and Compliance ensures that we have strong metrics that then, yes, sir.
So, Mr. Kettle, I appreciate that. Specifically, if I am on one of your trains, something happens to me, will there be a sheriff's deputy there?
We do not have sheriff deputies on every train, no. We target.
Okay, so in that case, Mr. Kettle, somebody assaults me or one of my children, what do I do?
On our trains, we make sure that, first of all, we have conductors on all of our trains that have immediate access to our security operations center. If something occurs, our conductors immediately call that into security.
What's the time frame?
Well, in a 545-mile system and sheriff deputies spread throughout, it can take a couple of train stations before our sheriff is able to be on our trains.
Okay. Mr. Corbett, how about you? If
Yes.
somebody's being assaulted, tell me the pace at which they could get immediate help.
Congressman, also, we have our own police force, extremely proud police force. We do deal with counterterrorism with the New York, Philadelphia market, so we have a lot of experience. We also deal with, you see, more drug-related crime.
Do you have law enforcement on every train in case?
We don't put them on every train, similar, but what we do have is the next station. We tell our crews generally not to get involved with the assault, but we put through legislation we just got passed in New Jersey 2 years ago that allows us to, if you're an assault, we protect certainly our train crews so that we don't have to, through the court system, that it's raised the, as a felony, so it's a serious felony, so that we do that, and then we're able to ban them from riding the system.
Thank you, Mr. Nolan, how about you?
We have our own police force, but it's not a large police force, and we're over 90 miles. Our conductors are trained that if there's an incident on a train, immediately get a hold of dispatch, who will get a hold of our police department, and if they can't be there in a timely fashion, we work with our local municipalities very cooperatively so that at the next available train stop, we can handle that situation.
In any of your equations, are you expecting other commuters to jump in and help?
No, we're not.
Okay. Ms. Johnson, how about you?
We have a sworn police department. Our second crew member actually is contracted out on our concessionaire agreement platform, and they are armed. And we also have a transit ride app. If somebody were to see something, they can say something, and then we'll deploy additional support.
Is there law enforcement on every train?
Not sworn, certified police officers, but armed security.
Okay, with no arrest powers? Or do
No
they have-
arrest powers.
Got it. Mr. Deck, you're the last one. I got 10 seconds left.
We have armed security on our trains as well as on our stations. We do randomize those processes. We have conductors on every train that have access to our PSCC, and we work very closely with our counties and municipalities for police to have arrest powers.
Yeah, I just, real briefly, and Mr. Chair, if you'd indulge me for a minute. The reason I'm asking this is you talk about safety as your priority. If I'm on your 90-mile train, 45 miles into it, and I get assaulted, or my children or my wife, the expectation is would be help as soon as practical. You're talking 25 or 30 minutes. The assault's over, the damage is done. And so as a former police officer, I know getting there quicker, and I think you all would agree with this. I understand the practicality of it, but you know what? I think that more people would feel comfortable and probably more ridership if that were to happen, if they saw law enforcement there with arrest powers. That's a deterrent. Yeah, thank you very much for indulging me, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and to all of our witnesses. As you've heard, commuter rail is a lifeline for many people who rely on it for affordable, convenient ways to get to work, school, and anywhere else they want to go. With the upcoming Surface Transportation Reauthorization Bill, there are ample opportunities to address some of the challenges for commuter rail. One such challenge is the challenge in ridership levels and patterns that has shifted since the COVID pandemic. Mr. Nolan, I understand that NICTD is building a second set of tracks between Michigan City and Gary, Indiana, which is expected to bring more ridership to Chicago as well. I welcome that. Amidst a new ridership landscape, what factors went into deciding to build additional tracks on this route, and how is NICTD evaluating what projects to fund based on the change in ridership?
Thank you, Congressman. The section is a 26-mile section that was largely single track, and Congressman Knowlton mentioned that we are an older technology and we need to look at ways to improve our service. So one of the things that we've looked at was areas where we have congestion. We had congestion in that area. By adding a second track with high-speed crossovers, we're able to add more express service, reduce our time to and from Chicago, and that drives ridership. Better performance is an opportunity to drive ridership. We're also going to add trains to the off-peak evening and weekend services so that we're not just that rush hour, that traditional rush hour, that 8 to 5 p.m. worker is not there anymore. We need to service the midday folks as well. So those two things, reducing the time to Chicago and back, and offering the services off-peak are huge for us.
Great, thank you. Another pressing issue for commuter rail and the rail industry writ large is the lack of regulation around locomotive emission standards. As of 2016, nearly 50% of existing locomotive emissions were uncontrolled with no standards for any pollutant. Mr. Kettle, why has the rail industry, in your opinion, been so slow to cut emissions despite the fact that cleaner engines exist?
Congressman, I think, again, in our system, we have gone all in as it relates to finding the cleanest burning technology utilizing diesel locomotives. Again, we use renewable fuel. We do not use petroleum diesel. I think it's a combination of factors. I think you're seeing throughout the country, commuter railroads are shifting to cleaner burning Tier 4 locomotives. We certainly are committed to that with a long-term future of getting to zero emission. And I think it's a byproduct of just the nature of the cost of equipment. When you buy a locomotive, you're going to have that locomotive for 30 years. And I think it takes time for that public investment to be fully absorbed, at which point I think other agencies across the country will look towards cleaner burning equipment.
Well, thank you for that answer. And just following up on it, the people most harmed by pollution from these emissions are rail workers and communities around those railroads. Communities like my district, which has some of the worst air quality in the country. What can we do at a federal level to speed up the transition to Tier 4 or zero emissions engines?
It really does boil down, Congressman, to funding. And you've heard my colleagues talk about the CRISI grant program and our eligibility or lack thereof. I think it's a question that as you look towards a reauthorization, making sure that there are opportunities for agencies like ours to pursue funding for those cleanest burning technologies.
Very well. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Burchett for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kettle, Metrolink is taking some steps, I believe, to reform its commuter rail business model. What would ticket prices be for you to break even?
It's going to take some time for us to play this all out, Congressman. It's a great question. I think what we're going to look towards is by growing the number of riders, we're hoping to keep our fares exactly where they are today as we grow our service. It's just going to take time to see if that generates the ridership that we hope it does, because we can't keep doing the business the way we have been doing it.
What's your current deficit?
Well, I think that any commuter railroad in the country is going to say we are a public transit agency. Right now, our current...
That's just a simple question.
Yeah, all right. Our fare box recovery right now is 13%. So public sources besides our fare box come to that number of 87% that requires additional public support.
So you don't have an exact number of your deficit?
I do not. I can provide that to you, sir.
I would like that. You serve a region in Southern California from San Diego to Los Angeles counties. It seems to me like it's the state and county's responsibility to subsidize your services, not the federal government. Your request that the Federal Transit Administration would waive interest on 2 locomotives because California passed some very costly and very, very burdensome rail regulations, to me, is out of touch. Our nation is already $35 trillion in debt, and billions in federal handouts are already available to rail. California's excessive regulation is a problem, and it's folks like you that if y'all don't speak up at the state level, it's only going to get worse for everyone else's sake. The rest of the country shouldn't have to pay for California's mistakes. I yield the remainder of my time, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Johnson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today, the demand to increase accessibility, opportunity, and equity through infrastructure improvements are more attainable than ever before because of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act passed by Democrats along with a few Republicans, Joe Biden's legislation, which provides $1.1 trillion, I think probably $200 billion of that going to rail, the largest investment in the nation's rail system, probably, well, I don't know how long it's been, but it's been a long time and it was long overdue. We did it, but we need to do more. And when finding solutions to the challenges confronting commuter rail systems, we cannot overlook the critical necessity of adequate funding for capital projects, service expansion, and enhancing transit ease of access, particularly for underserved communities. Mr. Kettle, you've caught a lot of flack for being from California today. That's unfortunate. Not that you're from California, but you're catching flack for being from California. But how, in your testimony, you discuss Metrolink's commitment to delivering safe and convenient passenger rail service while emphasizing the importance of federal support for the commuter rail industry's modernization efforts. How does Metrolink ensure its service expansions and improvements benefit all community members, including those living in areas with little to no transportation access?
Thank you, Congressman Johnson. The Metrolink system is an expansive system, 545 miles. We go through a lot of communities, many communities where freight railroads have long traveled. As we look to transform ourselves away from just being about the commuter, but about the user of our system for so many other purposes, a discretionary trip throughout the midday, the peak, the evening, that I think is something you're seeing throughout the industry, that we have to change our business model. That's what's going to ensure equity in transportation. If we're built only around the commuter, generally speaking, we're building for some essential service workers, but primarily for white-collar workers. That's not what we can be for the long term. And by instituting and implementing more midday service, evening service, and weekend service, that's providing equity and mobility that our region's never seen in a region as large as Southern California. So that's where we're going full steam ahead to try to make that happen. We see that as our real opportunity for our future.
Well, it definitely seems like a viable alternative, particularly as commuter rail passengers ridership has declined since the pandemic and the advent of work from home. What programs and initiatives can the federal and local government implement to mitigate barriers in service for marginalized groups such as language, mobility, and awareness?
Well, in the Metrolink system, the nature of access to our system, I think it comes back to frequency and reliability of service for those that use our system. Access, we can always improve our access at our facilities, at our stations, on our equipment that is in some case out of date. So I think those are areas as we overhaul equipment, those are our opportunities. But I do think, Congressman, the biggest opportunity for us to make sure that we're providing access is making sure we're providing frequency and reliability of our trains throughout our system so that people can count on us when they need us.
Thank you. Have you seen collaboration between federal, state, and local governments in advocating for support and funding for transit projects or programs? And where do you see the need for improvement?
The very nature of our system, we operate a 5-county system. I work for five counties that make up the Southern California Regional Rail Authority. We're all about collaboration. We all come together to fund our system. Our locals, those counties, are funding a big part of what we're doing. It's not all in the federal government, but we do come to the federal government, state government to help support the needs of the region. So we're very, very strong in our collaboration at all levels, including Sacramento as well, the state capital.
Thank you, and that concludes my time, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields, and now recognize Mr. Menendez for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I just want to let our ranking member, Congressman Payne, know that we're thinking about him, wishing him a speedy recovery. I also want to welcome Mr. Corbett, who serves as the president and CEO of NJ Transit. NJ Transit operates bus, light rail, and commuter rail throughout New Jersey, carrying thousands of people every day to work and helping our constituents move through the region. NJ Transit provides an essential service to the state and to our district. Last fall, they sprang into action to take on additional bus routes after private companies operating in Jersey City announced the closure of several essential routes. I applaud NJ Transit for ensuring that our constituents remain connected to essential resources and preventing gaps in service. Mr. Corbett, as your testimony highlights, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act has been a critical investment for infrastructure across the country. Our district has received almost $11 billion in grants from the IIJA, including $6.9 billion for the Gateway Project alone. The importance of these funds for our district cannot be overstated. Just yesterday, NJ Transit and Amtrak service was disrupted along the Northeast Corridor for hours due to overhead wire problems, disrupting the evening commute for thousands of people. Mr. Corbett, what happens when there are issues with infrastructure on even a small section of the Northeast Corridor?
Thank you, Congressman. Great to see you. We are the most densely populated state in the union, as you well know, and we're back at COVID. You know, the days of COVID, we're packed. Our trains, rush hour, you see it, you know, with standing room only. So if we have 1,000 people on a train and we have 20-plus trains an hour going into New York, if they're delayed even 10 minutes, that backs up trains all the way down to Philadelphia. So that means thousands, tens of thousands of commuters are stranded. And our number one cause of delays for New Jersey Transit is on the Northeast Corridor. It causes for our whole statewide system, and that is, you know, and that ties into the catenary and infrastructure. And Amtrak is, you know, that's what they inherited from the Pennsylvania Railroad. A lot of that catenary goes back to the 1930s. The signal system, these are almost 100-year-old systems that is Congressman Moulton touched on. So, you know, if that is not repaired and brought up to standard, that gets for us is important to prioritize that. That would be the, you know, the upgrade the catenary and the signal system would be a huge. The other big bottleneck, as you know, is Portal North Bridge, and certainly, Chairman, would love to have anyone from the committee come up. That's a huge bottleneck that within 2 years will be eliminated, and that's what, you know, this kind of funding provides us and Amtrak to do.
No, I appreciate you highlighting those points. It's why it's so critically important that we continue to provide robust funding for our state and regional partners as we continue to invest in rail. I want to just switch quickly to commuter trends. Over the past couple of years, transit agencies across the country have been struggling with budget deficits. At the same time, we've also seen a large shift in commuter trends. And we know that more people are working from home, which means less folks commuting into work, which means less fares for public transit agencies. Mr. Corbett, about how much of New Jersey Transit's budget relies on fare?
We rely on the operating budget, about 20% from federal money. Our capital plan is over 40%. So again, you know, our system, we don't, as you saw with Midtown Direct Service, and as Congressman King talked about, having our service direct ride, one-seat ride into New York, when you do that, property values soar in the surrounding communities. We're a big boom of transit-oriented development. That generates tremendous wealth, but we don't get we don't capture that ourselves. So even if we're running at a deficit, we're generating wealth for the whole economy. So,
but fares go into a large part of what your operating budget is. And so if you have less fares, your operating budget is constrained because less people are using your services.
That's right. But we do see on bus, we're back to pre-COVID levels. On rail, we're about 80%. I think in New York market particularly, people are not working Fridays. They say they're working from home. The jury's out on that. But so we do see that pulling down our average ridership. But weekend ridership, people are using a lot on weekends. So the trend is right. But you know, you couldn't raise the fares during the pandemic, and now we're raising our fares, as you know. But we still need that federal component to help us.
Yeah, 100%. It's a challenging dynamic. And I think that's what we all appreciate here. We've talked about with Secretary Buttigieg. As you see these new trends, it creates difficulty from planning purposes, operating purposes for public transit agencies like all of yours. And Congress wants to be here to be helpful, especially this committee. And if you have ways that we can partner together to make sure that we create that funding not on a go-forward basis, so you have dedicated funding to make those capital improvements, to ensure that we have a quality of product that's a customer-forward product or commuter-forward product. That's what we want to do. Just quickly, Mr. Nolan, my in-laws live in northern Indiana, in Plymouth, and my sister-in-law lives in Chicago, so I appreciate your work as well as what all of you do, but New Jersey and Indiana, a special day for me. All right, thank you all so much. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Ryan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in here on an important topic to my district. Thank you to everybody here. Represent the Hudson Valley north of New York City, so sort of on the other side of, but have many of the same challenges as you do, Mr. Corbett, in New Jersey, being part of the greater New York City metro area. So as you might imagine, the congestion pricing conversation is very much on the minds of my constituents, who along with me are frankly very upset, I would say furious, over this plan. As I'm sure you know, the MTA is rolling out what I think is an unfair, uninformed, and unacceptable congestion pricing plan, which would charge, in my district, families up to $15 a day, up to $5,000 more a year to commute to Manhattan. The problem there is that this comes with no commitments to actually improve service in our system. So you're asking my constituents to pay a lot more with no guarantees, nothing in the plan to upgrade service. I know you all are sort of tangential to the MTA, but wanted to sort of get your take on that. And really, as I understand your system, there are a lot more ride options, a lot more frequency. So if you could give any advice to the MTA in my area in particular, and just talk about how you see that playing out.
Sure. Actually, your colleague, a friend of mine, Mike Lawler, is his district, and we actually provide service. We operate, I'd say,
in Orange County. Yes.
Yeah, MTA is the most. Their best performance in the MTA is actually the service we operate for them, west of Hudson. So it is relevant. Certainly, there are places in the world where congestion pricing has worked. Singapore, Oslo, London, whatever. But in this case, it really is just shifting the problem out and MTA is taking that money, but it's not going to benefit, for example, our west of Hudson MTA service even. So we need to share in that money if it comes so that we can provide that service, and we need the capital investments to be able to get a one-seat ride from Orange and Rockland County through into Penn Station, New York. And right now we're getting zero, and it's just pushing the pollution. So we were very disappointed, and Governor Murphy certainly is fighting, and I know Congressman Lawler is working with Congressman Gottheim, for example, to really make sure that there's an equitable sharing of that funding if indeed it does go through.
And I appreciate you being direct and actually letting the facts and the reality guide us rather than some delusional plan, particularly in the outer boroughs. And I do want to thank you. Orange County is about half of my district, so you all operate that system. And most people don't realize, west of the Hudson River in New York State, there is no way to get to New York City without going through New Jersey, which, no offense to New Jersey, but just doesn't make a lot of sense. And the fact that $0 from this huge multi-billion-dollar plan are going to go to improve service to my constituents is incredibly frustrating, and I think a significant public policy failure. So I appreciate your continued partnership on this, and look forward to working with you and others that if we are going to force this through, which it sounds like they're going to try to do, I would like and will continue to push for investments in a single-seat ride for west of the Hudson for my constituents and all the residents of the Hudson Valley. So that's the main topic that I wanted to bring up, and appreciate everybody here and your commitment to all of our communities. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. LaMalfa for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Thank you, panelists. Let me launch right in here with, as a Californian here, we've been observing the debacle that the high-speed rail project has been for many years. It took several times on the ballot for voters to even have a crack at whether they wanted to decide to be bonded by $9.9 billion for the project that was told to be a $33 billion project. Now the real numbers are out, and it's well over $120 billion. The project needs at least $100 billion from some other source that is unknown. Private investment is not happening. They're not coming in unless you can guarantee a return, which is prohibited by the initiative that put that in place. So you can't guarantee or underwrite the high-speed rail system. So, Mr. Deck, I wanted to run this by you here. For what we could be doing instead of high-speed rail, I call it high-cost rail in California, is that local rail, commuter rail, using regular trains that would run a commute distance and adding to them. Has been a Sacramento, the Bay Area one. Wouldn't we, for a lot more bang for the buck, when we're still short $100 billion, to invest that in private companies or other more local possibilities or enhancing local possibilities that we would have?
I think there's benefit to both. We're in a unique spot in South Florida where we're witnessing both of those. So we have, our railroad, which is, public transportation commuter rail, and we run just a couple miles away from Brightline. And you can see the advantages and disadvantages to both. So I have seen that, where the private contractors and private entities can get things done very quickly. They don't have some of the restraints that we have when we're spending public money. So I do think that there's room in the pool for both of us. We are both very successful in South Florida.
Are you talking high-speed rail or public paid?
Both. I think there's room for both. We see Brightline in Florida. They run not quite 200 miles an hour, but they're 125 miles an hour between Cocoa Beach and
Now, is
Orlando.
that on conventional tracks?
Those are on conventional tracks, yes,
All
sir.
right, because it's horrifically more expensive to do the high-speed rail type tracks that are capable of 220, the long elliptical turns, and have to, just cut through communities and everything else on that basis. So it's a lot. Now, if you're talking something that's, a lot more affordable like that, I'd like to see more work. That's kind of what I'm talking about, more work done on up to 125 mile an hour rail on using conventional track and more conventional trains. That would be a fraction of the cost that we're talking about. So I got to move quickly here. So Mr. Kettle and Ms. Johnson, we're seeing more and more mandates in California on locomotives done by it's known as CARB, the Air Resources Board. They're constantly ratcheting down numbers of what the emissions are allowed on locomotives. I see a bit actually on social media about Arizona is opposing it being forced on them, and even a national mandate emulating California. I mean, I always tell people, don't do what California does; it'll just cost you. So, are you, Mr. Kettle, Ms. Johnson, are you aware of the rule being put in place by California on locomotive standards being continued to ratchet down and trying to implement new technology? Might even end up being complete electric.
Congressman, this is Darren Kettle with Metrolink in Southern California. I'll take this, Ms. Johnson, given that we're dealing with it real time. Yes, Congressman. So when CARB originally came out with their initial rule, we opposed it because we had concerns about technology being available for us to be able to run zero-emission locomotives. Over the course of the rule development, we negotiated a position to give us time to fully complete our fleet at Tier 4 locomotives, the cleanest burning diesel.
Tier 4? So you get to keep diesel. You don't have to go to electric. Is that
correct? We will not have to go to zero emission for 25 years. Gives us the time, it gives the industry time to actually develop the technology to get to zero emission for push-pull locomotives.
What do you expect that new technology is going to look like? Batteries that last longer, or
batteries or hydrogen, sir?
What's hydrogen?
Hydrogen or batteries. So those are the two zero-emission fueling sources
And
that
let's
are
say
out there.
20 years from now, when you start running up against that deadline and you're not anywhere close, kind of like CARB did in 1990, as I recall. What do you do then?
We're hopeful that when CARB sees that if the technology does not exist at that point, they do have within their rule an analysis of the technology. So at that time, we'll know more. But again, 25 years buys us some time.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry that didn't work out, Ms. Johnson. 5 minutes flies by. Maybe someone else will open it up for you, but thank you. Thank you, all panelists.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize 5 minutes to another valuable member of this subcommittee, Mr. DeSaunier.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Lamal, for this reminds me of our long debates on this issue 20 years ago when we debated in the legislature about extension cords for battery electric cars. I think you lost that debate, but anyways, and as a former member of...
Well, the cord wasn't long enough, is what turned out.
Right. Anyways, I made a comment about I'd be supportive of that for your district if the district had electricity, I think, which was unfair, but I got a good laugh. Anyways, as a former member of the California Air Resources Board, I appreciate the appointed by 2 Republicans and 1 Democrat, and the public health standards were held to under the Clean Air Act signed by Richard Nixon and the California Clean Air Act signed by Governor Ronald Reagan. So more comment on how the Republican Party has changed vis-a-vis public health. Mr. Kettle, I have a district in the San Francisco Bay Area, not dissimilar, very familiar with your challenges in the South Coast. Long commutes, I think between LA and the Bay Area, we have over half of the mega commutes in the country, 2 hours or more as people go further away. So in that context, in many years of trying to figure out how our investments in California, very car culture, in transit, in commuter, intercity and intracity rail and high-speed rail, and the challenges of peak trips. So when I was on the MTC, we had an agreement in one of our RTPs that we would reach 10% of our peak trips. I think we got as high as 6%, as opposed to London, 90%. New York, I think, is 20%, which is the best of the United States. So when all of us deal with these issues about land use and transportation and the 405 in West LA and induced demand and how those HOV lanes were filled up like this, we know we have to invest in this. And I very much appreciate the comments in this hearing because we know that exurban, suburban, urban. But what's changed in the last few years is what's happened to the economy. Certainly in the Bay Area, where we're going through layoffs in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, we probably have close to 40% vacancy in downtown San Francisco. For my commuters, 25 miles east of that, they, particularly people who are in the tech industry and can do it, remote work. So we have a great opportunity, and of course, not to bore the rest of you with Prop 13 and initiatives in municipal revenue and transportation revenue in California, but how do you see your challenges, just when we were starting to attract more people into traditional peak commutes, that would make that fare box recovery and make more discretionary opportunities for your governing board? This is a wonderful opportunity, but it's fraught with risks and challenges. So how do we take advantage of this? Not punish people to make them start to go back into work and the employer doesn't pay for that commute time. In California, we rely predominantly on sales tax, which is regressive. So this is the wonderful opportunity in areas like yours and mine, but it's fraught with challenges.
Thank you, Congressman DeSaulnier. Good to see you again, sir. Yes, so in Southern California right now, the peak has changed. 4 years ago, the world changed. In Los Angeles, our major urban center where jobs had been plentiful and vacancy rates were low, we are at about the same as the San Francisco Bay Area and the San Jose area, where, again, 2 markets that had large peak commute periods. The other thing that's really changed is that the peak has changed. What used to be this 9 in the morning or 8 in the morning to 5 in the afternoon is fundamentally different. So we're looking at how do we reimagine who we are to provide train service at different times of the day, into the evenings and on weekends, because it can't just be about that commute. And so that's our push. It is not for the faint of heart to look at some new concepts about how we're going to change how we do our business. But I think it's critical. It's going to be the only way that we're going to stay sustainable, because we know continuing business practices the way they are today, just looking at the standard peak, that's not sustainable long term.
Just briefly, we know that density is very important in modeling around the world. So getting those peak trips and reverse peak trips and getting higher density around your hubs and transit-oriented development, could you respond to that?
Completely agreed. The density is important, but again, in Southern California, where affordable housing is in the outlying areas and we still have essential workers that need to get to urban areas, we've got to make sure we're getting to some of those less dense areas as well.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. We're going to go to a second round. Mr. LaMalfa has other questions for you, so we're going to do that. So, Mr. LaMalfa, second round, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. I just have a retort, too, for my great colleague from the Bay Area there. The Republicans didn't leave those pieces of legislation that Reagan and others have signed. They left us, okay? They've been weaponized for 50 years and turned against us, and court decision on court decision. We're still all in for those positive things, but at this point, you can't even hardly make a move to do simple things. And as far as the electricity going all the way up to my area, it is getting harder when the enviros tear out my hydroelectric dams up on the Klamath and don't replace the electricity. So yeah, we do look like we're less electrified. So anyway, but he's my good pal. I'm not, this is fun banter here. Anyway.
We have a comedy routine, bear with us. I respect your reference to Senator Jeffords.
Okay, thank you, panelists. And Ms. Johnson, I'm going to throw that question back to you I had a little bit earlier on the CARB and the technology and the locomotives, et cetera, that we were talking about.
Yes, thank you very much, Congressman. I would like to state for the record, I was previously in California, recognizing I'm in Denver, Colorado. And so to Mr. Kettle's point, that was raised relative to having more or less a 25-year exemption, recognizing the CARB had originally put forward the Innovative Clean Transit Regulation for 2040. I don't feel as I could opine, recognizing that I run the agency in Denver, Colorado, as relates to where we are currently.
Okay, thank you. Back to Mr. Deck. When we're talking about, local lines, commuter rail and such, I've been interested a long time, especially as we've suffered with the super high costs and massive delays on California's high-speed rail. And I guess if there's good luck in Florida and they're paying for it themselves, great. I don't begrudge anybody doing that and having economically working out. But how much more can we benefit from 125-mile-an-hour trains on regular tracks? And what would it take to raise our infrastructure, our, rail, the track condition to be suitable? How much potential is there for a lot more 125-mile-an-hour tracks in any given area, around the whole country or regionally, what have you? Is that a good way to be able to achieve higher speed without having the hyper-expensive high-speed rail?
So I will preface this by saying I'm by no means an expert on high-speed rail. But I do know that once you start getting to those speeds, you really have to worry about your grade crossings. So the biggest concern for me is going any higher speeds than that is grade separating and making sure that you don't have the road crossings. And when you have a train going 125 or 200 miles an hour, those grade crossings become critically important. And that's where you really get that cost factor that goes in with raising those, is that you're separating from your conventional road crossings.
And if you're talking rural areas, can you possibly build enough split-level crossings when, through fields and farmland and all that stuff?
With enough money, anything's possible.
Well,
that's the answer to that. It's an investment.
Well, every crossing I hear is about $40 million, and California's probably double that at $80 million, and I don't know if you can do that on every little small burg like I have in my district, and we certainly can't be taking away all these crossings because they're critical to small towns and ag areas. So, but overall, do you see much potential for, instead of being hell-bent on 220-mile-an-hour hyper-expensive, is there a lot of potential for 125-mile-an-hour conventional tracks to be able to kind of fit that need for higher speed that people seem to be looking for?
I think it depends on the area and the service and what you want. If you're looking at like particularly the Bright Line West, it's going to go from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. The business model is to get you there faster than a car in a high-speed train. So that that is a private entity making that investment that they can do that. So I do believe that it is a matter of what the
unfortunately,
customer.
it started out as a private concern. Then recently, I think $3 billion of federal money got dumped in on that. I was really disappointed in that because it was touted as being private the whole time. Anybody else on the panel want to touch on that 125-mile-an-hour rail topic? Sir.
The only thing I'd say in New Jersey, with a dense population we're running with Amtrak, one of the things is not just hitting a certain X number of miles per hour, it's the whole trip. So if you're doing 160 miles an hour, but then you got a slow speed because you have ancient infrastructure that you're going to have a temporary speed restriction doing 60 or 35 miles, it sort of obviates it. So it's the whole system from A to B to make sure that you can keep a steady higher speed than necessarily be the top, Shinkansen or whatever kind of speeds.
Yeah, I mean, I focus on 125 because that seems to be where it becomes a quantum jump into rail technology that has to be more expensive. So, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate your extra time. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Are there any further questions from any members of the committee? There being none, this concludes our hearing for today. I'd like to thank each and every one of you. The first hearing, I guess, we've had in this subcommittee for commuter rail in 20 years. So job well done. Great dialogue today. The committee stands adjourned.
I think so.